Pacific Ocean holds no memory. Its surface shifts under wind and light, erasing the paths of ships, the coordinates of disaster, the exact location where a family once floated inside a rubber raft smaller than most living rooms. In June of 1972, the water stretched in every direction, without interruption, without landmarks, without promise. The horizon curved the same way at dawn as it did at dusk. Distance became meaningless. Time became something else. The Lucette was a wooden schooner, 43 feet long, built in the 1920s. By the time the Robertson family purchased her in England, she was half a century old, her timbers seasoned, her rigging sound enough for blue water sailing, but not immune to the wear that comes with age and salt. Dougal Robertson, a former dairy farmer turned sailing instructor, had sold the family farm in Staffordshire. He, his wife Lynn, their sons Douglas, Neil and twin boys, Sandy and the youngest, along with a family friend named Robin Williams, set out in January 1971 with a plan to circumnavigate the globe. They were not reckless. Dougal had sailed in the merchant navy. He understood navigation, weather, the mechanics of survival at sea, but understanding does not insulate. By June 1972, they had crossed the Atlantic, passed through the Panama Canal, and were sailing west across the Pacific toward the Galapagos Islands. The voyage had been long but uneventful. The children had adapted to life aboard. Lynn managed the galley, the limited supplies, the rhythm of shipboard routine. Robin Williams, a 22-year-old student, helped with sails and watches. They were more than 1,000 miles from the nearest landmass when the whales appeared. There is no consensus on the species. Some accounts suggest killer whales, others pilot whales. What is documented is that a pod surfaced near the hull, and at least one whale struck the Lucette below the waterline. The impact was immediate. Water poured into the hull faster than any manual pump could expel it. Dougal assessed the damage and understood within minutes that the schooner would sink. There was no time for a detailed salvage. The family and Robin gathered what they could reach: a small amount of food, water containers, a few navigation tools, fishing line, a knife. They inflated a fiberglass dinghy and a smaller rubber raft. The Lucette went down in less than an hour. They were left with a 9-foot fiberglass dinghy and an inflatable raft designed to hold 4 people. There were 6 aboard. Their position was approximately 300 miles west of the Galapagos, far outside any recognized shipping lane. The decision to wait for rescue was not irrational. Dougal had sent distress signals before abandoning ship. He knew that search patterns would be initiated. He knew the approximate coordinates. But the ocean is vast, and a raft is small, and visibility from the air depends on weather, angle, luck. The first days were spent organizing. The dinghy, though cramped, was more stable than the raft. Dougal assigned watch schedules, rationed water to half a pint per person per day, and forbade any consumption of seawater. Lynn inventoried the food: a few tins of biscuits, some glucose tablets, dried fruit, a small quantity of onions and cabbage. The twins, aged 11, were old enough to understand the situation, but young enough to require distraction. Neil, 18, and Douglas, also a teenager, took on more responsibility. Robin remained steady. They caught rainwater in the raft's canopy. When squalls passed, they baited fishing lines with scraps and waited. Rescue did not come. Days accumulated without the sound of an engine, without the silhouette of a mast. The sky remained empty. Dougal recalculated their position daily, using a sextant salvaged from the wreck. He determined that drifting with the current would eventually carry them towards Central America, but the distance was more than 1,000 miles, and the drift was slow. He made the decision to attempt rowing and sailing the dinghy eastward, rather than wait indefinitely. This marked the point of no return. They were no longer passengers awaiting intervention. They became navigators of their own survival. The routine became rigid. Mornings began with a water ration, measured carefully. Any turtle that surfaced near the raft was pursued. Dougal and the older boys learned to haul them aboard, butcher them with the knife, and distribute the meat. Turtle blood was drunk immediately to supplement hydration. The liver, heart, and muscle tissue were eaten raw or dried in the sun. Bones were sharpened into hooks. The shell was used to collect rainwater. Nothing was wasted. Fish were caught irregularly. Dorado, small sharks, triggerfish. When a catch was made, it was divided equally. Lynn kept a log, tracking rations, health, morale. She described the process in mechanical terms, without decoration. The sun was constant. Skin blistered, peeled, blistered again. Lips cracked and bled. The younger boys developed sores that refused to heal in the salt air. Eyes stung from the glare off the water. Sleep was fractured, interrupted by waves slapping the raft, by shifts in wind, by the need to bail water that seeped through seams. Dougal navigated by sun and stars, adjusting their heading as best the small sail allowed. Progress was measured in miles per day, sometimes fewer than 10. The horizon did not change in character, only in position. By the third week, the food from the wreck was gone. Survival depended entirely on what could be taken from the ocean. Some days there were no turtles. Some days the fishing lines came up empty. On those days they did not eat. Hunger became a constant pressure, not sharp but grinding. A slow erosion of strength. Lynn noted in her journal that the twins grew quieter, their energy visibly diminished. Neil developed an infection in one leg. Douglas's hands, raw from handling lines and shell, stopped healing. Robin remained physically capable, but showed signs of withdrawal, long silences, a distant gaze. Dougal himself lost weight rapidly, his frame thinning, but he maintained the navigational routine without deviation. The psychological toll is harder to document. The Robertsons did not record internal monologues or invented thoughts. What is known is that discipline held. There were no recorded arguments over rations, no panic, no abandonment of the system Dougal had imposed. Whether this was due to his authority, to family cohesion, or simply to the numbing effect of exhaustion is uncertain. What is clear is that the structure persisted, even as physical capacity declined. The fourth week brought a series of storms. Rain provided water, but the waves grew large enough to threaten capsizing. The dinghy and raft were tethered together, but the motion was violent. Sleep became impossible. They bailed constantly. At one point, a wave broke over the raft and nearly tore the canopy free. Dougal and Robin worked in darkness to secure it. The storm passed, but it left them soaked, chilled despite the tropical latitude, and more exhausted than before. By the fifth week, they had drifted and rowed more than 600 miles from the site of the sinking. They were approaching the outer reaches of the doldrums, where wind dies and current slows. Dougal calculated that landfall was still several hundred miles distant. His navigation was limited by the tools he had and by the difficulty of sighting the horizon from a low platform in rough seas. There is evidence that he began to doubt whether they would reach land before their bodies gave out. Lynn's journal entries from this period are shorter, less detailed, suggesting either exhaustion or a deliberate conservation of effort. On the 37th day, a ship appeared on the horizon. It was a Japanese fishing trawler, the Tokamaru II, operating far from its usual grounds. The Robertsons signalled with a makeshift flag and a mirror. The crew of the trawler spotted them and altered course. The rescue was efficient. All 6 were brought aboard, dehydrated, malnourished, sunburned and infected, but alive. They were taken to Panama, where they received medical treatment. None of the injuries were life-threatening. Recovery took weeks. The psychological impact was not publicly detailed. The consequence of waiting for rescue that never arrived was that survival became a matter of continuous action rather than passive hope. The Robertsons did not wait beyond the first days. They adapted, moved, fished, navigated, and endured. The title of their ordeal might suggest a failure of external intervention, and that is accurate. No search plane found them, no passing ship intercepted them in the open ocean. But the deeper consequence was internal. The recognition that rescue is not guaranteed, that survival demands agency, that the ocean does not pause for hope. Dougal Robertson later wrote an account of the event. Lynn also published a separate memoir. The two versions differ in tone but align on facts. Neither embellishes. Both describe the same rationing, the same turtles, the same silence of the sea. Their survival became a case study in small craft endurance, cited in maritime safety courses, analysed for decision-making under duress. The Lucette herself remains on the ocean floor, unmapped, unrecovered, her exact resting place unknown. What remains from the 37 days is not a story of triumph, but of endurance. The Robertsons did not conquer the ocean. They negotiated with it, took what it offered, withheld what it demanded, and survived long enough for a ship to cross their path. The margin was narrow. A few more days without rain, a few more days without turtles, a slightly different drift pattern, and the outcome would have been different. The historical record would have been shorter. The family of footnote in maritime loss. The Pacific has erased the coordinates, the path of their drift, the daily positions Dougal logged, the places where they caught fish or saw whales, all are now just numbers in a journal, lines on a chart that no longer correspond to anything visible. The water has moved on. The Robertsons moved on as well, returning to land, to routine, to a life no longer governed by the horizon. But the consequence remains, encoded in the survival itself, that waiting for rescue is only viable if rescue is coming, and that certainty is a luxury the ocean does not provide.